My name's Liz James, and I'm a Byzantinist, and I'm also a Professor of Art History at the University of Sussex. I had a terrible dither about my object. I wanted it to be a Byzantine mosaic in Greece, but I could not decide on which one. There are the three jewels of 11th century churches, Osius Lukas, Neomone and Daphni. There were the wonderful mosaics of Thessaloniki, the Data, which took my breath away when I first saw it. I'd quite like the handful of tesserae in the British Museum said to be from the Parthenon. In the end, I couldn't choose a mosaic, and I had to settle on this rather manky-looking lump of plaster tied together with string. This image of the lump shows off 11 gold tesserae embedded in plaster, and in the foreground and to either side of the tesserae, you can see the square dents with red paint where other tesserae were once stuck in place. It's not necessarily an aesthetically gorgeous object, but it's an object where three worlds collide. The first world is that of Byzantium. The fragment, which actually comes from Daphni, says a lot about how mosaics were made. You can see the plaster bed that the tesserae were stuck into. You can see the red underpaint on the top surface of the plaster, and a red paint background creates a warmer feel to the gold tesserae laid on over the top of them. The gold tesserae themselves are an expert piece of work. A sandwich of blown glass as a thin top layer to which the gold leaf was attached, before being put on top of the thicker base layer of honey-coloured glass. And the tesserae also suggest wider questions about networks and contacts across the Byzantine Empire. Where did the glass come from to make the tesserae? Where were the tesserae made? Who brought them to Daphni? And they remind us of the skill and artistry in making a mosaic, of the mosaicists perched on their scaffold setting each tessera, creating from each tessera a little mirrored surface, set unevenly. Just look at how rough that surface is. And the mosaic itself reflecting and juggling with light to make up an image of which these 11 tesserae were once a tiny fragment. And that mosaic image speaks to Byzantium, speaks to the Orthodox Christian Empire, and to the relationship between material art and immaterial faith that Byzantine religious images are so concerned with. The second world is that of late 19th century England. This chunk of plaster and glass was brought back from Daphni by the arts and crafts architects Robert Weir-Schultz and Sidney Barnsley, probably in 1889, and it now sits in the BSA archive in Athens. Weir-Schultz and Barnsley were doing systematic fieldwork on Byzantine monuments in Greece, almost for the first time. Prior to that, the most British attention paid to Daphni had been that of Lord Elgin, who had taken columns and capitals from the site's Temple of Apollo, and these went into the British Museum in 1816. For Westerners engaging with Greece, romantic Hellenism held no place for Byzantium. It merely presented questions about whether the Greeks were descendants of Plato or Plethon, and it allowed for the superiority of temples over churches, the Parthenon frieze over Byzantine mosaics. Even in Greece, in the 1821 revolution, Daphni was used occasionally as a military site, in the 1830s as a barracks, and in the 1880s as the public mental hospital, now on the other side of the road. It was not until the late 1880s that work began on the restoration of the church and its mosaics. So Weir-Schultz and Barnsley's souvenir reminds us of the place of Byzantium and attitudes to Greece in 19th century Western Europe. But it also looks forward to the Byzantine revival of the 19th century, where gold mosaic meets gold mosaic in Weir-Schultz's work at Westminster Cathedral, and where arts and crafts scholars such as William Morris hailed Byzantium. The third world, Daphni and its mosaics, restored and renewed, are now a tourist spot, although considering it's a UNESCO site, it's not that easy to access and it's not hugely heralded in the tourist literature. Indeed, and there is a snide remark coming here, I don't believe that the BSA's own summer schools have really ever bothered going to it. I know something of that is to do with the ongoing restorations there after earthquakes, but it also reminds us of the ambivalent position of Byzantium. And 200 years after 1821, how much further have we moved from the glory that was classical Greece? Perhaps also in 2021, this little piece of plaster and gold speaks of the Orthodox faith and the suspicion of religion, the associations between faith and extremism, the wariness of religious belief which is a part of the 21st century world. The question of whether to be Greek is to be Orthodox, and the pulls within Greece itself of its classical and Byzantine heritages. It's still just a lump of plaster and glass, but it contains multitudes, incorrigibly plural.